At the beginning of the film, an Interpol agent is shown being held hostage by an Italian mafia group. At that moment, the mafia wants the agent to reveal the whereabouts of his colleague who had dared to deceive them. However, the agent refused to disclose the information, which made the mafia boss named Silvio frustrated and led him to cut off the agent's finger while stating that he would continue to torture the agent. Unable to endure the pain any longer, the agent finally revealed that the associate they were looking for was now in the city of Barapuglia. After learning this, Silvio, the mafia leader, promptly killed the agent. 1 month later, the scene shifts to a widow with a child named Karina, who is working overtime at a vegetable store. It is revealed that Karina is a former addict who has successfully overcome her addiction. Shortly after, Karina receives a call from a friend who is also a former addict like her. Her friend explains that she is being harassed by a dealer for debts from the past. Hearing this, Karina asks her friend to wait as she will come over, and without hesitation, she leaves her overtime job and rushes to the location. Upon arrival, Karina sees her friend in a terrified state but tries to calm her down. Shortly after, the dealer named Charles appears, demanding payment for her friend's past debts. Additionally, Charles also mentions that the interest on the debt has grown significantly. Hearing this, Karina desperately tries to help her friend, but their money is insufficient, so Karina reluctantly gives her mother's ring to Charles. In the end, Charles agrees to release Karina's friend, who is extremely grateful for her help. After that, Karina then says goodbye and heads back to the vegetable store to complete her overtime work. Back at the vegetable store, Karina quickly finishes her tasks, which include chopping and bagging vegetables. Shortly afterward, she receives a call from her daughter, who plans to visit her for the holidays. It is revealed that her daughter lives with her ex-husband and now wants to see her mother. At that moment, her daughter also mentions that she will arrive at the airport around 5 a.m. and hopes Karina won't be late to pick her up. Hearing this, Karina promises to be at the airport before 5 a.m. A few hours later, while Karina is taking out the trash, she accidentally witnesses a robber involved in a shootout. Not wanting to get involved, Karina quickly gets into her car and speeds away from the scene. While the robber, not wanting to leave any witnesses, grabs the stolen briefcase and quickly pursues Karina. Shortly after, the robber managed to get into Karina's car and ordered her to leave the area immediately. Meanwhile, the briefcase that was stolen earlier was now destroyed, consumed by flames. During the journey, the robber, whose name was Kovek, asked Karina to take him to a pharmacy because he was suffering from a severe stomach wound. Under threat, Karina had no choice but to comply with his demands. Upon arriving in front of the pharmacy, Kovek instructed Karina to buy the medications that he needed, and Kovek also gave her a communication device so they could stay connected. Once inside the pharmacy, Karina quickly purchased the medications as instructed by Kovek through the communication device. Meanwhile, Kovek continued to point a gun at Karina to ensure she didn't try anything risky. At that moment, the pharmacist realized that Karina was in danger, so she tried to help her. Simultaneously, Kovek fired shots at the pharmacy and ordered Karina to return immediately with the medication, threatening to kill both Karina and the pharmacist if she did not comply. After returning to the car, Karina asked where they were going next, and Kovek replied that they were going to her place to treat his stomach wound. Hearing this, Karina explained that she didn't own a house but rented a place, and Kovek instructed her to take him there. Upon arriving in front of Karina's place, Kovek warned her not to try to escape because he would hunt her down. Once inside the place, Kovek asked Karina to help him treat his stomach wound. Shortly thereafter, her room door was knocked on by the landlord, who was disturbed by the noise Kovek was making. Additionally, the landlord found bloodstains in front of the door. At that moment, Karina, not wanting to endanger the landlord, assured him that everything was fine. After that, Kovek asked Karina for some clothes, and fortunately, she had some of her ex-husband's clothes. Kovek then instructed Karina to turn towards the door while he changed clothes, because Kovek was actually an Interpol agent. Kovek then received a phone call from someone who turned out to be Silvio, the mafia boss in charge of Italy. At that moment, Silvio asked if Kovek had obtained the desired item, but he replied that he had run into some issues and asked Silvio for more time. Meanwhile, Karina overheard their conversation through the communication device, leading her to conclude that Kovek was a corrupt Interpol agent working for the mafia. In short, Kovek took Karina to another location. where she mustered the courage to ask if Kavek was indeed a corrupt Interpol agent. Hearing this, Kavek finally explained that he and his partner had once infiltrated Silvio's mafia group. Unfortunately, their cover was blown and, as a result, his partner had to be eliminated. Meanwhile, Kavek had managed to escape out of town, but he eventually had a reason that made him return to Silvio's group. After that, Kavek explained that Silvio had instructed him to rob illegal goods from a business rival. Initially, Kavek managed to steal some of the goods, but unfortunately, they burned when he was chasing Karina earlier. Shortly after, Kavek and Karina stopped at a location, where he was planning to trap some dealers so that he could rob the illegal goods again. Kavek then gave Karina some money and told her to meet with 2 dealers and pretend to buy a large quantity of illegal goods. When Karina met with the dealers, she said that she wanted to buy a large quantity of illegal goods and had a suitcase of money in her car. Karina also showed them the money that Kavek had given her to make them believe and take her to their warehouse. However, the 2 dealers suddenly took Karina hostage and demanded that she hand over all the money now. Calmly, Karina responded that she was not the one wanting the goods, but rather her friend in the car. She then explained that her friend would not hesitate to kill them if they tried anything funny. Feeling cornered, the 2 dealers finally agreed to take Karina to their boss's warehouse, and they instructed Karina to wait in the car because a courier would soon arrive to take her to the warehouse. Once back in the car, Karina pleaded with Kavek to let her go because she had to pick up her daughter at the airport, but Kavek ignored her completely. Shortly after, a courier that would take them to the warehouse arrived. As Karina and Kavek followed the courier, they suddenly lost sight of him. At that moment, Karina noticed the time and realized that her daughter must have already landed at the airport. Secretly, Karina distracted Kavek and eventually managed to escape. Realizing this, Kavek was furious, but he accidentally found Karina's phone left in the car. So he decided to kidnap her daughter at the airport because Karina now knew too much about him. Shortly after, Kavek arrived at the airport first, and Karina's daughter, who was with a police officer waiting for her mother, was spotted by Kavek. He then flashed his badge to show that he was an Interpol agent. However, Karina's daughter, realizing something was wrong, tried to run away. Shortly after, a chase ensued, while Kavek and the police officer ended up pointing their guns at each other. Kavek then threatened that if the officer dared to shoot, the child would die as well. In the end, the police officer surrendered, and Kavek took Karina's daughter away. During the journey, Karina's daughter, named Lucy, asked why Kavek had kidnapped her. Lucy then explained that if Kavek wanted money, he had kidnapped the wrong person because her mother never had much money. The scene then shifted to Karina, who flagged down a police patrol car. Karina then explained that her daughter was at the airport and asked the officers to take her there. Seeing Karina in distress, the officers tried to calm her down and told her to get into the car. At that moment, Kavek suddenly approached them, and Karina immediately asked the officers to arrest Kavek, saying that he was a bad person. However, Kavek quickly showed his badge, convincing the police that he was an Interpol agent. Shortly after that, Karina realized that her daughter was already in Kavek's car, while Kavek held a gun to one of the police officers and demanded that they both surrender to avoid any casualties. Kavek also instructed them to hand over their pistols. In the end, the 2 police officers complied with his demands, while Karina was told to switch cars immediately. Once she had switched cars, Karina pleaded with Kavek to remove the handcuffs from her daughter's hands, and fortunately, Kavek agreed. During the journey, Kavek received a call from Silvio, who asked if Kavek had completed the task. At that moment, he was unsure of what to say and asked where Silvio was because there was something he needed to discuss. Not long after, they arrived at Silvio's residence, and Kavek quickly went inside. Soon after, Silvio's men arrived to take Lucy away, while Karina screamed in panic, but there was little she could do, especially with her hands handcuffed to the steering wheel. The scene shifted to a room where Kavek asked Silvio for a little more time, and Silvio responded that as a wise mafia boss, he would grant him 1 more hour to steal 5 kilos of illegal goods. However, if Kavek failed again, he would face severe consequences. After that, Kavek returned to the car, and Karina immediately asked where her daughter was. And Kavek explained that Silvio had given him just 1 hour to steal the illegal goods again, and if he was late, Lucy would be killed. Hearing this, Karina was furious that Kavek had involved her daughter in his problems. It was then revealed that the reason Kavek was obeying all of Silvio's orders was because he had also taken Kavek's own child hostage. This meant that both Kavek's child and Lucy were in danger, forcing them to work together. Karina then remembered something and asked Kavek to unlock her handcuffs and give her phone. Karina then called Charles, the person who had previously taken her ring, and pretended to want to buy goods from him. Sometime later, Karina met with Charles and Kavek also appeared from behind with a gun. Without wasting any time, Kavek demanded a large quantity of goods, where Charles replied that he and his group were low on stock, but he didn't believe him. In the end, Charles was forced to take Kavek and Karina to his hideout. The scene shifted to Silvio, who was relaxing while monitoring Karina's and Kavek's children. At that moment, Silvio stated that their lives were on the line within the hour. If their parents didn't return with the goods he wanted, they would be killed. At the same time, Kavek and Karina arrived at Charles's hideout. When Charles entered, he was suddenly killed by one of his own men. After that, a shootout ensued between Charles's group and Karina and Kavek. After taking down Charles's group, Karina and Kavek accidentally saw a woman named Emily trying to escape with a large bag, leading to a chase between them. Shortly after, Karina and Kavek managed to corner Emily, where Karina tried to calm Emily by saying that they wouldn't harm her as long as she handed over the bag. After several attempts to reassure her, Emily finally surrendered and handed over the bag before quickly leaving. After that, Karina and Kavek returned to the car to continue their journey. Kavek then checked the bag and discovered that it didn't contain the illegal goods he was after. Kavek then mentioned that they were running out of time and it was impossible to search for the goods that Silvio wanted. Therefore, the only way to save their children was to confront him. Not long after, Kavek contacted Silvio and told him that he had obtained the goods, prompting Silvio to instruct him to come to a warehouse. Silvio also demanded that Kavek eliminate Karina. Sometime later, Kavek arrived at the warehouse where Silvio was holding his child hostage. As he got out of the car, Kavek told Silvio's men that the goods were in the trunk, including Karina's body. When Silvio's men opened the trunk to check, a shootout suddenly ensued. During the shootout, Kavek told Karina not to be afraid because there were only a few of Silvio's men in the warehouse. After taking down Silvio's men, Karina and Kavek quickly searched for Silvio. Meanwhile, Silvio was attempting to escape while holding Lucy and Kavek's children hostage. Eventually, another shootout occurred between them, where Karina pleaded with Silvio to release the children and escape safely. However, Silvio responded that his other men would arrive soon. When Silvio put the hostages in a car, Kavek tried to chase him, but unfortunately, he was shot by Silvio. Believing he could defeat Karina, Silvio aimed at her. Meanwhile, Karina realized her gun was out of bullets. However, at one point, Karina managed to injure him and rushed to the car. At that moment, the police arrived, leading to a shootout with Silvio. When Silvio had a chance to kill Karina, he was suddenly shot, and it turned out the shot was from Kavek. In the end, Kavek, Karina, and their children managed to survive the ordeal. The next day, it shows Karina taking her daughter to a motel while carrying a bag given to her by Kavek. When Karina checked the bag, it was filled with a large amount of money. 1 year later, it shows Karina, who is now successful and has opened a luxurious restaurant on the Italian coast. All of this was thanks to the money that Kavek had given to her. The end. Moral lesson from the story: if you ever find yourself negotiating with a mobster, just remember that it's better to keep all your fingers and avoid mixing your groceries with your illegal goods.